let me just tell you a little bit about Sean and Jacqueline. Sean had a rich and varied professional career. When he finished his training here at NBS, he joined the Netherlands Dance Theatre and later Ballet Frankfurt. And as a member of these companies, he originated roles in the works of such outstanding choreographers as Yuri Killian, William Forsythe, Mats Ek, and Hans van Manen, among others. And then he shifted gears and returned to his first love, which was musical theater. And in that capacity, he appeared in 3 original Broadway casts, as well as numerous musical revivals, and he even appears in the film version of Chicago. He's now in his 6th year teaching here at NBS, and with his broad professional experience, he's an excellent guide to students preparing for their careers. And in addition to his role as a mentor, he teaches contemporary repertoire and improvisation. And I'd like to add a personal word, that he's a wonderful colleague with a wonderful sense of humor, and I really enjoy the times that we have to sit down together and talk about the state of the world, the dance world in particular. He's very generous with his knowledge, and I've learned a lot from Sean. Jacqueline was trained in Montreal before joining the professional program at MBS in 2009, and she graduated from the professional program last year. And this year she is in the post-secondary program. She is a student with a keen intellect, and as well as a very disciplined student who approaches everything she does with real seriousness. And that's reflected in the fact that she has received a number of awards here at the school, including the Lucy Potts Award for French, the Patricia Goss Award in Art, and 2 awards that recognize her extraordinary talent as a young dancer, the Jeffrey Kirk Ballet Award and the Peter Dwyer Scholarship. I thought we'd start by asking you what this collaborative process was all about. How did it work?
Working with Azure, well, first of all, I have to say it was a wonderful opportunity to get to work with a choreographer like her, like Azure. And it's a great privilege to have a new creation, a new work done on you and other students. So it was really amazing. It was not easy in any way. Very detailed, very accelerated, if I can say, because usually a new creation of this size and length and complexity, usually it takes maybe about 6 weeks or so, and we're quite a few dancers in it, and we had to do everything in 3 weeks, or 3.5. So it was very, very fast, but it was really quite amazing.
So how did it work? When she says that she wants it to be seen as your ballet as much as her ballet, what was your input?
As you said earlier, she, before casting and before actually creating movement that would be the choreography itself, she started off more with like workshops with us, just seeing how everybody moves and testing a few movements on us. And then often she'd pick out someone doing a movement and go along with it and say, okay, now let's tweak that and everyone try this. And eventually it just sort of, it's a collaboration. It's everyone works together and she creates on us, on the dancers she has in front of her, and then challenges us and tries to make it interesting.
Sean, do you have anything to add to this process?
Sure. Please stop me if I go on too long. But no, part of what she did that was so unique and so interesting and so specific to this work, she asked the dancers to create a gesture, a simple gesture that anyone could do, and then she worked from the chair mostly, but intellectually, and added more and more and more and more layers of detail to this gesture so that it became more meaningful, more personal, and much more challenging as well. I mean, none of the coordinations in the piece, although when you come to see it, it will have settled into the dancers' bodies, hopefully. But none of the movements at first felt organic or simple to the dancers. So it would be interesting as audience members to know that ahead of time, that it took many, many hours of trial and error to get these complicated coordinations into the body and feeling somewhat organic and natural.
Well, could you give us a specific example?
She would ask, we had worked on several different phrases of movement, and I think at one point it was actually Jacqueline, she asked Jackie to take the arms from one combination and layer them with the legs from a completely different combination, and then to do the head movements from an entirely different combination again. So your brain is working like unbelievably hard to try and remember all the detail of those many different aspects and layer them together in something that is physically possible even. So it was very, very challenging.
So you told me that even things like where you would focus your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Yeah.
she was very specific about eyes and focus. And for instance, within all this layering of 3 different versions of things, the heads of one combination, the legs of another, and the arms of another, and all 3 coming together, and not necessarily all in the same time or counts. So you had to mold your own choreography, I suppose. And then she would add an extra little tilt to the head at one random point, and so then it would be even more complicated. And then she'd say, okay, tilt the head, and then 2 counts later, just the eyes go that way, and then blink, while doing all the other things. And so at one point, it's just sort of like, okay, you have to think about everything. So it ended up being, especially at the beginning of the creation process, it was very frustrating. More for yourself because the coordination just didn't make any sense at all. And yeah, but it became very interesting once you get it into your body, and hopefully she doesn't change it too much once it's in your body.
So Sean, how does this differ from the way a straight classical ballet choreographer might work?
Well, I think because of the specificity of the classical vocabulary, most dancers already know these steps. The steps have names. We know, we've worked on them in class. We all know what an arabesque is. The thing that was so amazing about this piece for these students in particular, they have to use every inch of classical technique that they have ever developed within themselves. They use it all. It's performed in point shoes. There's a moment, for example, she had worked for several days on a phrase of Japanese counting. So the dancers were also vocalizing. So you add yet another layer of complexity to it. And doing very specific head movements. And she has, in the end, one of the female dancers balancing on point with the help of her partner, but not even holding his hand, just fingers resting upon fingers. And she's in an arabesque on point, and she has to do all of these head movements from the original Japanese counting phrase, which I have to say, if you're trying to balance on one leg and you try and focus on many different places and move your head in these really complicated ways, it's extraordinarily challenging. And I mean, what a vote of confidence that she had, you know, the dancers in the school thinking they can handle this. And she really pushed, I think, to the maximum of everyone's ability. Every single person in that room was challenged in a huge way.
But I'd like to speak for a moment about, you teach improvisation here at the school. So why is learning to improvise and learning to work collaboratively so important now?
Well, I mean, even in the most classical of companies now, there's a great deal of contemporary repertoire. And whatever choreographer walks through the door, of course, every dancer wants to be involved in these new creations. And every choreographer has their own way to come up with their own movement vocabulary. Some have it all mapped out ahead of time completely in advance. Others want to take it organically from what's happening in the room. And I think with Azure, it was kind of a bit of both. She would do some of her work with her assistant in the other studio beforehand, coming up with some detailed hand movements, and we would come in, and it was really, I mean, she works very much with energy, and so the energy in the room it's so lovely when this happens. It's, these unexpected things emerge, and the collective energy becomes something greater than anyone could have possibly imagined.
And could you comment on the relationship of the movement to the music?
Yes, it was quite interesting because most of the phrases she choreographed without music. And I think she was always working several steps ahead of us, obviously, but she would at some point say, now try that phrase that we've been working on to this piece of music. And so many times it happened that it fit like it was all meant to be together. Even the length of the prelude itself would be almost exactly the length of the phrase of choreography. And so sometimes the movement is quite obviously musical and quite obviously related to the music, and other times it goes completely against the music. There are some really abrupt changes in the score, and sometimes the movement reflects those, and other times she wants the movement to continue through as if nothing had changed. So that also challenged the dancers in a really specific way, because everyone's tendency is to go with what the music is telling them. And there's a solo at the end of the ballet for a young man in grade 12, and he was told specifically not to follow the feeling of the music, because it gets very sort of romantic and poignant, and she wanted his solo to still have a bit more of a hard physicality. So there's all kinds of approaches throughout the piece.
And Jacqueline, do you want to comment on your confrontation with the music?
I think you covered it really well. It depends on the movement. Sometimes you do have to feel the music and go with it in a way. And then other times you just have to keep counting in your head and keep the energy, whatever the energy is, but you have to keep it very defined and let the music be the opposite of what the movement is wanting to portray. And it's not obvious, but it's very fulfilling in a way, because then as a dancer you get to try everything all in one ballet, and it's really interesting. Yeah.
Sean, could you comment on your role as the rehearsal director? What exactly that means to be the rehearsal director?
Well, it was very challenging in this instance because Azure liked an atmosphere that was very alive in the studio. So what she called, at the beginning, what I felt was kind of like chaos, just a little bit. She said, we're going to multitask today. And so we'd have 3 girls over on this side coming up with yet another version of a certain phrase, and she was working with a group of boys on the other side, and I was reviewing with a group, cleaning up a section to try and, because as specific as the movements were, you know, each dancer would interpret it slightly differently. And of course, what she wants in the end is for us to really match very, very meticulously all the physicality, the angles of the heads, the placement of the fingers, where the eyes are going, everything. So Andrew, her assistant, would have some people, I'd have another group of people, and all of this would be going on in the same room at the same time. So to remain focused on what we were doing was very challenging, because my tendency was to go, what's going on over there? What's happening over there? And is everyone okay? And do we need a break in 5 minutes? And that, I think in that sense, I wasn't a very good rehearsal director, because I was so also challenged by how much information was coming at me and the speed of it, that I would completely forget to call the breaks for the dancers. And we worked very long hours, and I would just go like, oh, sorry, 3 hours went by, and no one got to have any water or anything. I mean, it wasn't that bad, I exaggerate. But now my job is to try and do the best that I can to really really clean all of those sections so that it really is as together as it needs to be, so the formations are clear, so that everyone has the same approach in the different sections. Because, I mean, if you imagine, there's, I think, upward of 35 students in the piece. So, and she left very few people for covers, so everyone's on all the time. And so I'm like, you're all going to be healthy, right? Everyone's going to be okay. And so far, knock on wood, they are. But it's just maintaining the integrity of what she intended, mostly on for me.
So do you have to have it all in your head?
Well, I set that out at the very beginning because of how complex it was and how many things would be going on even in one room. And then she would, at certain moments, say, "Can you take that group into the other studio and review and clean that section?" Meanwhile, she's making a solo for somebody else in the room, which I'm not even seeing or being aware of. So I told the dancers, I was like, this is, in a true sense of collaboration, we all have to do our best to maintain as much detail as possible. Because, for example, there's a dance for 3 boys. Somehow it ended up that I was never in the room when she worked on that section of the piece. So when it comes to that section, I'm like, it's all you. You have to remember this, and I'm going to be asking you what the detail is. And so I gave, there were some clear leaders that emerged in the process, as in any process. So what I did was assigned a task for the dancers to write out the counts, which were very complicated, with the movements. So I have a book now that's now this thick, documenting all of the movements, so that if you know, as time passes and things tend to kind of disperse or dissipate, that we can go back to what I'm calling the Bible for Azure's ballet and say, on count 3, and the eyes went upwards and to the left, and that's it, period. I think what's interesting too about a new creation is that, for example, with Jackie's role, it's for Jackie. It really is. It really uses all of the best that she has to offer. So someone else could be physically as adept and learn the steps, but it's not quite going to have the same effect really with someone else. So I think, I don't know, we'll see. I mean, perhaps this piece will live on and it will continue in the rep at the school. That would be lovely, because, but that's why, for example, too, I'm very happy I have my book for future generations of casts of Azure's work.